All right, everybody. Let's see. It is live here. I don't know why is it giving me this thing. Oh, okay. All right, everybody. Let's get this started for tonight. I hit the live button and it kind of did something weird or something. But how is everybody doing tonight? This is July 15th, 2024. It is the live show. So I'm a little late, but as you can see by the background already, although it's blurred out, many of you can kind of recognize that background that I am here in Pennsylvania. I'm up here seeing my dad. I'm going to be here for, I think, a couple of weeks at least. And I was talking to him. He goes out and plays cards on Monday evenings, and he got back just like 10 minutes, like maybe 10 till 8 or 10 till 9. And so I'm talking to him, and then on top of that, my brother Brian calls from Florida, and then I'm talking to him, and I wanted to go to the bathroom, so I don't have any delays or pauses here in the show. And so that's why all that put together is why I am what's it saying here? A little late. So I apologize for that. But I have a great show lined up for you tonight. We are going to spend a lot of time tonight, or I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about assassinations. Because I think some of you already know, and Hazel's already, I see in the comments. If some of you don't know, I've been fairly vocal about this since Saturday, when I got here Saturday night, that very coincidentally, I mean, I don't know how big it could be more of a coincidence, that the assassination attempt on Donald Trump happened about 3/4 of a mile from where I'm sitting, directly back in that direction. True story. For those of you, once again, I did a little map. I made a map. What was it, Saturday night or yesterday, just showing where I am now, and my dad's in Renfrew, Pennsylvania, and comparing that to where this happened at what they call the Butler Farm Show area. Now, very technically, it's called the Butler Farm Show area, but it's actually a Renfrew, Pennsylvania address, and that is where my dad lives and has lived here. He and my mother moved here up to this place 20 years ago from Leechburg. So I'm right here in the area, and some of you also probably know that I posted a video. I went over there yesterday, and my dad was with me, and I did a little video driving around the perimeter of the 3 sides of the perimeter. You can't get to the 4th side because it's all blocked off. And for all I know, it may still be blocked off today. And I kind of explained that in the video. It's on the YouTube channel. It's free. You do not need to have special privileges or anything to watch that video. It's up there with all the episodes and everything else. I don't know how long the video is, just a few minutes. And I did my best to try to kind of show the surrounding area. But I've been coming to this area for 20 years, since my parents, of course, my mother's not with us anymore, but I've been coming to this area for a long time. I'm very familiar with this area now. That's like the main route that my dad, if we're not, he and I, to go out somewhere, that is the direction we go, going in that direction, just in a generally east direction. Although I've never been to the farm share area, I think my dad has, and I've never set foot on that airport property right next door. But on the other hand, there's an ice cream place right across from there that I've been to many times. There's a pizza place that I've been there many times. There's a little soccer field over there where I've gone over and thrown my discs. Very familiar with that area, and all of that area is now completely blocked off because of what happened. So I thought, well, we are of course, we're in the disappearance business technically at Unfound, but in generally, we're in the crime business. So I thought this would be a good opportunity tonight to go through assassinations in American history. I'm going to stay away from assassinations from other countries, other cultures, other former civilizations. I'm not going to start talking about Julius Caesar being assassinated at Tu Brute and all that. I'm just going to stick to American assassinations. And I had yesterday and today I had a chance to read, took a few notes, and what can we deduce about famous people? Mostly, we're going to talk mostly about politicians, but some non-politicians as well. What can we learn about these occurrences and about the people who have committed them? And that might give us some insight as they continue to look at this young killer, 20 years old from Bethel Park, PA, who on Saturday took shots at former president, now wanting to be the next president, Donald Trump. And by the way, we're staying out of politics tonight, so I'm not going there. Do not even post anything in the chat about politics. It will get deleted. We're just talking here about famous people who just happen to be politicians who have been assassinated, or there have been attempts on their lives. What does this look like? Why do people do this? Is it really about politics or something else? What is usually the makeup of the people who do this, at least in the United States? I'm staying away from other countries. I'm not going to play, dumb American and start talking about assassinations in France and Japan and wherever else, although I do recognize that it was an assassination that technically started World War I. So if you don't know about that, you can go look that up on your own time. So I'm going to spend most of the time talking about that tonight. But of course, I'm going to first talk about how I even found out that this was even going on, because I was driving here. I got up early Saturday morning, and I left Florida 6:30 in the morning and got here. It was really busy. There wasn't any driving up here, Georgia, South Carolina, all the way. There weren't any stoppages. There weren't any wrecks. There weren't any necessarily traffic jams. But there were a lot of cars. Of course, it was a Saturday. It's the summer. And it took me a lot longer. I think it took me like a half hour longer to drive up here than it did in March when I drove up. So I got here about 11:15 on Saturday night Eastern time. And so the shooting had happened about 4 or 5 hours, something like that, before I even got here. And so I'm going to get into that. So we're going to spend a lot of time on that tonight. We're going to look at multiple assassinations. Of course, we're going to start with Abraham Lincoln and try to go chronologically up to the present. Of course, in doing this, we have to remember, although Donald Trump, of course, survived, that there was a man from the, what we would call the Butler County, Buffalo Township area. So that would kind of be the area that I would drive through if I were going back to Leechburg over in that area, who actually did get hit and was killed. It sounds to me like he was killed instantly when given the rifle that was used and the ammunition was used. That is not hard to believe, and not hard to believe. And we also have to remember, so that person has died. It's very sad. Very sad. But there are also 2 other people who got hit who are in critical condition, and I don't know that, are they going to live? I have no idea. I don't know any more about any of that than any of you do who have been following this. But surely one victim was killed, and then of course the shooter was killed just seconds after he started shooting by a Secret Service sniper who was on another roof. I'm going to try to give you a lay of the land while I'm doing this when we do talk about what happened on Saturday. And, you know, there's going to be a lot to look into. The main issue being, how did somebody who, you know, it wasn't like it was at night, it wasn't like it was in a city setting or anything like that. How did some 20-year-old who, to me, doesn't seem like, you know, no military experience, nothing like that, doesn't sound to me like a lot of gun experience either. How does somebody like that get even within range to shoot any famous person, no matter if it's Donald Trump, Joe Biden, any other politician in office, retired, or rock stars, actors? How does anybody like that get in that position in the first place when there are supposed to be security measures in place to stop this, you know, kind of thing? So, because when we're talking, you know, I realize many of you are not familiar with guns. Some of you may be anti-gun. We're not here to get into that either. But you should know the shot is 130 yards with an AR-15 rifle. You know, I own an AR-15 rifle. I'm very familiar with them. I've shot it many times. I did not bring it to Pennsylvania. It's still in my condo back in Florida, but I've had it for 5 years now. I've shot it many times, very familiar with and everything. 130-yard shot is not far. Not with that type of gun at all. It's not far down. Now, it might be a little far if you don't have a scope on it. But if you even have a halfway decent scope on that kind of rifle, 130 yards is nothing. Nothing. And it's really, I know one person got killed, but it's really a miracle that more people were not killed. And of course, we know about this. Of course, we look at Las Vegas and what happened there. That was about kind of the same distance. I don't know the exact same distance, but kind of the same thing. We know 50-some people got killed there. Now, of course, the difference is that in Las Vegas, they didn't have surrounding security with rifles themselves. Whereas over here at the Butler Farm Show, if it had been a different type of situation, had it been a concert and they hadn't had some sniper on an accompanying roof or something, I got to believe way more people would have been killed. So so this is an investigation. It's going to take a while. I'm not here to get into conspiracy theories, take conspiracy theories elsewhere. I don't want to talk about it. All right. We're not doing that tonight, but we are going to look at this from a standpoint of crime. We're going to look at this. Who does this? What does it seem motivates some of these people? When politicians get shot, is it really political or is it something else? Could it be something else? So that's what I'm going to be doing for a large portion of the show tonight. And once again, because we're in the disappearance business technically, but in general, we are in the crime business as well. Of course, many, many times have I talked about murders, unsolved murders, solved murders, incidents like what we're talking about happened just a half mile to 3/4 mile away from where I am sitting right now. And like I said, I believe that area is still blocked off. Now, what's weird about that, though, that part of that road there has been getting worked on. And even when I was here back in March, that part of that road. So, and by the way, I'm at my dad's and his internet is not as good as mine. So we're going to do the best we can. It may go out once in a while, but I'm hoping that everything stays well. So just to get some other things out of the way before I get into what's going to be a very, very, very long talk tonight about assassinations and just some insight into them. And for those of you outside the United States, like Hazel and some others, just bear with me. You may find it interesting anyway. the United States does have a large assassination history. All right, but I'm going to talk about that a bit as well. Just a few things that have gone on with me, and kind of a heads up for next Monday. But my trivia team blew it again this past Wednesday. We got all the questions right until the final question, missed it, and got 0 points again. So I'm not going to be there for like the next 3 weeks. They're going to have to figure it out. And granted, we win together, we lose together, but given that the question this week really was not in my wheelhouse anyway, I have to admit I didn't quite feel as bad as I did as the week before, missing the airport question. But I like to win, and so I guess I was kind of in a little bit of a mood on Wednesday night. Not as bad as the week before, though. So we're continuing to blow it. We're way behind. Still plenty of time to catch up, but I have complete confidence in them. They're just going to have to do it without me for at least the next couple of weeks, because I'm probably going to be here till my birthday at least, which is August 1st. So like at least 2 weeks and 2 days is how long I'm going to be here. And I'm getting work done. In fact, I did an interview for an upcoming episode today. So that's what's going on with my trivia team. As I've already stated, I'm here in Pennsylvania. It's hot. The big difference, though, between Florida and here being hot, it's as hot as Florida during the day, but Pennsylvania really cools off at night, even in July. Whereas in Florida, there's no cooling off. That's really, I've noticed that. Of course, I've been here enough times, though. But I'm up here. Of course, I'm in the room that I'm usually in. My bed that I sleep on is just to my left here. Of course, the door is out there. My dad is back from playing cards. He's out there watching TV. And so we've, he knew I was coming up. I told him like a month ago that I'd be coming up and hanging out. And then finally, before I get into everything that I want to cover tonight, next Monday show, the next live show, I'm thinking I'm going to move it to Tuesday, because I know you're all going to laugh. But next Monday night, Kip Winger, or the band Winger, remember them from the late 80s, early 90s, She's Only 17 and Madeline, all those songs. Winger is playing about 20 minutes from here. I've never seen them in concert. They're playing at just a little venue not far from here. And I think myself and my buddy Brad, who still lives in the area, we're going to go see them next Monday night. So unless something changes, you can expect that the next live show won't be until next Tuesday. So that will be July 23rd. So it won't be July 22nd. It'll still be at 9 o'clock. But I'm going to move the live show for next week from 2 till Tuesday. So mark that on your calendars. Of course, I'll mention it more than once. All right, let's see who is in here. And then I want to get into, I'm going to sprinkle in some Unfound stuff as well, some other things that are going on. But I'm going to get right into this assassination history of the United States, like both of some politicians and some non-politicians. And we're going to take a look at the circumstances and who did that and what were their motivations and everything. So hello, Nephew Charles. Good to see you. I've gotten the pictures of Bration in his Navy uniform at that camp. That really cracks me up, I'm here to tell you. Hello, Karen. Hello, Assistant Carrie. How are you? Taylor, how are you? Macy, good to see you. Yeah, I'll make sure I'll say hi to my dad later. Thank you, Macy. Stephanie, Hazel, yes. Lisa, what's going on? Trying to join from a road trip in the middle of Kansas. Well, I hope you're getting good internet access out there, Lisa. Marty, wow, 9:01, Marty. You were almost on time. Congratulations. Amy, good to see you. Suzanne. Sarah, good to see you. Yeah, Pennsylvania is where the shooter's from, and that is where I am right now. I grew up I was born and lived until I was 28 years old, or set 27, here in Pennsylvania, Hazel. Yes. Yes, you are. Hello, Kathy. Good to see you. Sheree, thank you for moderating tonight. That is close, Hazel. Yeah, Charles getting lots of cleaning and organizing done. That's funny. Marty says, that's so crazy. I think the whole situation is shame makes me shake my head. People are absolutely nuts, Carrie says. Amy says, we're not safe anywhere. It's a shame. Hazel says, very, very sad. The father who died. Yes, he said his wife said he jumped on his family. Yeah, I know. Marty says, the shooter, we're not going to be mentioning his name tonight, by the way. He apparently was on his rifle team in his high school. Okay, that's news to me. Hazel said, so many questions about how he was able to get that close. Glenn, how are you doing tonight? I am going to be answering your question tonight, Glenn. Thank you for the question. Marty says, I actually played a trivia night the other day. You came in second place, should have been first, but we messed up the final question. Well, what was the final question, Marty? You got to let us know. You got to allow me to have a shot at it, Marty. Hello, Karen. What's going on? Good. All right. Thank you. Tuesday works for Charles. All right. Yeah. So, Marty, we want to know what that trivia question was that you and your wife missed. If it's do your best. If it's multiple choice, I know it might be long to type out. Just do your best. All right, let's talk about assassinations in the United States. Now, first of all, you understand when you get into a topic like this that some of the assassinations in American history are controversial. I think everybody first thinks of JFK. Did Lee Harvey Oswald do it? Did somebody else do it? Was it a combination of people? Was it the CIA? Was it the mob? Was it Cubans? Was it Lyndon Johnson, which I think really was a theory pushed forward in the movie JFK by Oliver Stone. Going to try to stay away from all of that is when we get to that one, but you should know before we get there, I have to tell you, I'm a guy who believes that JFK or Lee Harvey Oswald did it all on his own. And now that I've shot rifles for some years, really one man could have easily pulled that off. No problem at all. But we'll get to that eventually. I'm going to keep the politics out of it, although that may be a little tough because at least some of these assassinations, we could call them political, but maybe not necessarily in the way that you think. And if you don't realize it, maybe even for all the Americans in the audience, I think mostly when Americans think of presidential, although I didn't realize Donald Trump's not president now, he was at one time, he wants to be one again. When we think about presidential assassinations, I think people probably think Reagan, they think JFK, and then they think of Abraham Lincoln. But most people forget that we had two other presidents who died due to assassinations, James Garfield and William McKinley, and both of those were not really that far away in time. Just not many years separated those two assassinations. Of course, the late 1800s going to the early 1900s, 1901, when William McKinley was shot and killed, and then Teddy Roosevelt became president. But we also have Teddy Roosevelt, when he was trying to run again, he got shot. We're going to get into that. We have to remember that Gerald Ford, even though he was president for only 2 years, one of the Manson family tried to shoot him when he was in Sacramento, California in 1976. The gun didn't go off. So we have to remember that. And then we had, I don't know if this is necessarily assassination, but we have to remember, what was it? George W. Bush, he had a shoe thrown at him. So, there's more than just Lincoln, JFK, and like I said, within our lifetimes, another president getting shot, although he lived, Ronald Reagan. There's a lot more than just those. Okay, and I'm going to get into these at least a little bit and analyze them. Once again, what we do here, analyzing them from a crime point of view. So Marty says, I knew what it was, but she picked an answer before I finished reading it. What country introduced the first ever French fry? I think that's right. I think it is, yeah, Squeaky From. Yes, Glenn. From. Yes, I'm agreeing with Stephanie on that answer of those different answers there. So I think that it is what Stephanie said, Marty. That's the answer that I'm going for. All right, so let's start right here. We're going to start with of course, we know maybe we really want to go back. Alexander Hamilton, or of course, one of the founding fathers, very well known because of of course, of a musical that came out, got all sorts of awards. But that wasn't actually technically an assassination. He was shot and killed. It was, of course, during a duel with Aaron Burr. And I don't know if we really can count that as an assassination of a major leader in American history, although it certainly is noteworthy. So I'm just going to start with Abraham Lincoln. And we all know, of course, if you know history, if you're outside of the United States, I'm not going to expect you to know some of these things. But of course, the guy that shot him was John Wilkes Booth. And this was shortly after the Civil War in the United States ended. This is during a time that was called Reconstruction, where the Union, the northern states, went down into the southern states because we had burned up so much and destroyed so much that, just like an occupying force, Union soldiers went down into the South and rebuilt the South. And that's why it's called Reconstruction. Building, because we're all a country again, even though they tried to secede, still part of the United States. We went down there, tried to fix all of that. And it was really no different than like after World War II, like in Germany or Japan, where the Allied armies went in and oversaw the reconstruction of the cities and rebuilding everything. Kind of the same thing, but doing it within our own country. And while that was going on, John Wilkes Booth was a member of the South. He supported the South. He was very upset that slavery was going to end, and he enlisted other people to put together this scheme to assassinate, to kill leaders, not just Lincoln, but leaders, major leaders of the Union, the northern states, in the hope of delaying the Reconstruction and everything getting back together for as long as possible. And so the plan was not just to kill Lincoln, but the Secretary of War at the time, and some other officials. And each person was supposed to go kill each one of these people. And John Wilkes Booth, who was really the leader, he was going to go. He found out that Lincoln was going to be at the Ford Theater. He's going to go in there and kill Abraham Lincoln in a way, as best as he can, his way he sees it, to stop the North and the South getting back together to become a country once again. Now, we know what happened. First of all, these other people who were supposed to kill these other figures did not do so, even though they were eventually caught, considered co-conspirators in this whole thing. They were hung. And, of course, John Wilkes Booth did show up at the Ford Theater, went in, did kill Abraham Lincoln. He didn't deal right away. I've actually been to the spot where he did die on a high school trip in like 1983. But John Wilkes Booth shot him, jumped down onto the stage of where this play was going on. A lot of people thought this was actually part of the play. It, of course, was not. And he yelled something in Latin, which means death to tyrants. And he ran off. Of course, he was eventually caught. And of course, would he get caught and executed? I didn't put that in my notes. But of course, he ended up paying for what he did. And really, so looking at that one, was it political? Absolutely. Was John Wilkes Booth crazy or anything? No, I don't think he was. I think that he was a true believer in his cause. I don't think he was delusional in any way. How he thought this was actually going to work, I don't know. But this was certainly political. All right. Even though, but really, and this is going to be a common theme throughout all of this, of course, this did not change the trajectory of the United States. We could certainly look at other countries where assassinations have occurred and said, man, that assassination really altered everything. The country went in a completely different direction. You might say, like Russia, when they had the Tsar Nicholas, and then the Bolsheviks took over and they killed the family, kind of assassination style, I guess. That, of course, that country went a totally different direction than than what it was. Whereas here, John Wilkes Booth and him killing, a lot of people consider Abraham Lincoln to maybe be the number one president of all time because of what he had to deal with in those years, did not change the trajectory of this country at all. It was very sad, horrible, but it really really in the history of the United States, it was really just a small little speed bump. Even though as great a man as Abraham Lincoln was, really didn't change anything. Now, Andrew Johnson, the guy who took his place, the 17th president, he ended up getting impeached. So he wasn't the greatest president, but even so, we had a great president who got assassinated due to political reasons. Kind of a bad president took over, and the country still remained together. And then after Andrew Johnson, if you don't know, it was Ulysses S. Grant, who, I guess his status as a president has kind of grown over the years. Whereas I think maybe in the late 1800s and 1900s, he was kind of shaky. I think these days, maybe historians look at him in a little different way now. So it was political, did not change the trajectory of the United States at all, even though one of the greatest presidents was assassinated for political reasons. All right, so I'm just going to see what everybody. All right, so it was Belgium. Very good. Your wife got trigger happy and picked France. Oh, come on, Mrs. Speedman. Come on. Glenn says, I took the John Wilkes Booth tour a few years ago. Awesome. Realized where the expression name is mud came from. Right. Deborah, what's going on? Good to see you tonight. And by the way, give this video a thumbs up. This is going to be a very unique kind of live show tonight. Give it a thumbs up. Please consider hitting the join button below. You get some stuff that other people do not. Of course, there is the, if you're watching there on YouTube, there's also the super chat button down there. If you'd like to monetarily contribute to what we're doing here, just the little green button below, and I'd appreciate it very much. Moving on. Next president, James Garfield. And I have to tell you, even as an American, had James Garfield not been assassinated, I don't know if anybody would even remember him. Maybe sorry for him. Whereas, of course, we would remember Lincoln had he not been assassinated. And, of course, we remember many presidents who weren't assassinated, who lived out their terms, and we continue to remember them to this day. But you start getting into presidents of there seems to be me looking at American history. You start looking at presidents that were in the 1840s to the 1850s. Bunch of no names. You got Millard Fillmore and then after Ulysses S. Grant, once again it becomes there's Grover Cleveland and these other, once again, a bunch of people, a bunch of presidents who maybe a lot of people forget about. And then the way I look at it, the next notable president is Teddy Roosevelt because of everything he did and of course his persona and everything. But there are times in American history we had presidents, and really to most people, they don't even know that they were presidents. And even a lot of smart Americans, doesn't quite register some of these. William Henry Harrison, Benjamin Harrison, all these ones. And people are like, well, when I know it was like the 1800s, but when he served, nobody can really say. So James Garfield, my impression is that he is one of those presidents that had he not been assassinated, he would not have been, he probably would not be remembered today. I'm not saying he didn't do some things in office or whatever, but otherwise not, I know some stories get like he did all these things. I'm sure he did. But for the layperson, that's probably all they know about James Garfield, that he got assassinated. Well, he was assassinated by a guy whose name was Charles Guiteau, Guiteau. And although this assassination sounds political, it's really not. And Charles Guiteau was all ticked off because he was a public servant and he thought that he should have gotten appointed some position in the federal government. And when he didn't do that, he got all ticked off about this, and he just took it up. He took up his anger with James Garfield, the president. Even though James Garfield didn't even know Charles Guiteau even existed. I don't think that maybe never met before or anything else. But because Charles Guiteau thought that he got undermined, somebody got hired instead of he did, and I'm not even sure he should have been. I think he was a little bit, over, he thought he was qualified when he wasn't. I'm not saying he was delusional or anything, but he thought he should get this particular position or he should have been up for something. He didn't get it. He was all ticked off, and so he was ticked off and went on, and so he took it up with the leader of the executive branch of the federal government in the United States, and that was James Garfield, and he killed him, shot him and killed him. But this was not, so it wasn't necessarily political. I don't think that Charles Guiteau had anything against anything James Garfield was doing in office. James Garfield was just, a prominent target. And it's really kind of, maybe Charles Guiteau is kind of like what we see today when, what we call like suicide by cop. We have young people going into schools. They have no escape plan or anything else. They're going to go in. They're going to kill as many people as possible. They know they're eventually going to die. They're going to have a shootout, and they're eventually going to die, and they don't care. It's not that they hate any particular person that they shot or hate that school or anything. They just get it in their mind. This is what they want to do, and they do it. I would put Charles Guiteau in that category. It had to do with government, certainly, but not political, in that somebody shot James Garfield because political differences or because he thought the government should go in a different direction. It wasn't like, a Democrat shooting a Republican shooting a Democrat for political reasons. It wasn't anything like that, although it did have to do with government. And really, James Garfield was completely innocent in all this. Whereas we go back to the previous example with Lincoln, John Wilkes Booth took his anger out on the very person, for the reason the reason John Wilkes Booth was angry was because of Abraham Lincoln. So he went right to that person, shot him. Of course, I don't agree with that, but very pointed, very direct, very logical. Whereas Charles Guiteau, it might have seemed logical in his mind, but to the rest of us, it doesn't sound very logical. And it very well may be that he just didn't go and kill the people who didn't give him the job because maybe that just wasn't high profile enough for him. I think that's also something that we need to consider. But once again, it happened because of government, but not political. And this is what I think you're going to see with many of these, is that not, even though we're going to continue to talk about a lot of government officials or ex-government officials, it's amazing how most of these are not what we would necessarily call political attempts or political, murders or whatever else. Very interesting. So that is James Garfield. Do not forget his name. Maybe you now want to go to Wikipedia and read up on James Garfield and see what he did actually when he was president, and then you'll get to his assassination. The next president, big famous leader, at least in American history, that was assassinated, and his name is William McKinley. And he was assassinated in Buffalo, New York in 1901. And that is how Teddy Roosevelt, if you didn't know this, that is how Teddy Roosevelt became president. Teddy Roosevelt was actually the vice president at the time, and that's how he became president. With William McKinley, he was shot by a guy whose name was Leon Czolgosz, Czolgosz, something like that. Czolgosz. Now, on the surface, this one might seem political. Leon was a communist, and he looked at the United States. Of course, we all, we're so caught up in our own times of the late 20th into the 21st century. We think this is all new stuff. It's not. This about communism and socialism, it is in the United States and all these things. This talk has been going on for 150 years. It's kind of arguing, and Leon looked at the United States in 1901 and thought that there were too many poor people and too many rich people, not helping them out. Does this all sound familiar? Just remember, everything you hear about political topics today has been covered over and over and over again, well before any of us were born. Remember that. So when the media is trying to tell you this is a new topic, it's never been like this, they're lying to you because they have no sense of history either. But Leon was all upset about this. And, so it might make sense. Well, it's political. He doesn't think that William McKinley's doing enough. Well, Leon also fell in a lot of conspiracy theory at the time. A lot of what we would also recognize today, like there's a few people who are controlling, completely trolling all of the world, and people conspiring to keep Leon down and all of these things. And so in his mind, he took it out on William McKinley. Shot him, killed him, very, very up close. And that's something you also have to remember. For all three of these first ones, due to the weapons of the day, Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, all shot at very close range. All right. Of course, when we get, of course, to JFK, we know it was something different. But sign of the times, late 1800s into the 1900s, how accurate were rifles? Suspect. So if you really wanted to kill somebody, you really had to do it, fairly up close. And that's what happened. So Leon went, killed William McKinley. Once again, doesn't seem that Leon necessarily had anything against William McKinley, but Leon took it out on William McKinley. But like I said, Leon had all these ideas of things that were going on that were not true. Very well could be that Leon maybe didn't have all his faculties. I'm certainly open to the idea that he might have had some mental health issues, not because he believed that there's a big disparity between the rich and the poor, but when you start reading about him and some of the things he believed, you might start thinking maybe the guy wasn't totally all there. And so he went and shot William McKinley. And once again, would William McKinley even be remembered if it wasn't for this assassination? It's questionable. Of course, McKinley ended up having a mountain named after him, but even that got changed just within the last 20 years. Remember Mount McKinley? Yeah, that's named after the former president, the one I'm talking about here. And of course, now we know it in Alaska as, what is it? Denali. They've actually changed the name. It's not known as, at least some people maybe still refer to it at that, but I think if you go to the maps, it's now known as Denali, and that is in Alaska. William McKinley wasn't from Alaska, so I don't know about that, but that's what happened. So that is the assassination of William McKinley. So within the course, Lincoln shot in 1865. James Garfield, I did not write down the year, but it was sometime, I think, in the 1880s. And then William McKinley in 1901. So in less than 40 years, 3 American presidents were shot and killed. So we start thinking about, oh, it's so violent these days and all this. 3 presidents shot and killed in 40 years. So that would mean that from now going back to like 1985, 3 presidents, pick any 3 you'd like, would be shot and killed. So it just shows you things are just, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later. So moving on. So once again, we have 3 presidents shot, but I would only say one of those is what we would call a political, really, really political killing. The other ones seem to be just fits of anger, delusionism, just wanting to take their anger out on someone or something. That's what I would say. Now, the next one, if you don't know this, Teddy Roosevelt, he takes McKinley's place. He serves out his time. And then the next president takes over. I think it's Taft. And he decides he wants to be president again. So he decides he's going to run again. It's called the Bull Moose Party. He got shot while he was campaigning. So after he became president, got out of office, Taft takes over, doesn't like where everything's going, doesn't like where the Republican Party is going. And he decides, I'm going to run on the third party ticket, Bull Moose ticket. And while he is campaigning, he gets shot. I'm not making this up. Teddy Roosevelt gets shot by a delusional saloon keeper whose name was John Schrank, S-C-H-R-A-N-K. And I'll tell you all you need to know about this assassination. John Schrank believed that the ghost of assassinated President William McKinley had directed him to kill Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt lived. I don't think that this shooting affected the course of his life really at all. In fact, I think he got shot, gave his speech anyway, and then got the bullet removed later. I mean, if anybody knows anything about Teddy Roosevelt, that shouldn't surprise anybody. And he ended up living his life. I don't think that getting shot shortened his life in any way or had any ill effects from it. So, and even in the cases, the way I understand with James Garfield and William McKinley, the way I read their assassinations, it's very possible had they been shot like that today, they would have lived, given advancements in medicine and fighting infection and everything else. It very well may be that James Garfield and William McKinley would have lived. But given medicine of the day, the understanding about germs and disease and everything, they could not be kept alive. So this is also something, once again, we're thinking about the guns and weapons of the time, and then you have to marry that with the medicine of the time. Because we even have to think when we get up to Ronald Reagan, it's very easy to believe that if Ronald Reagan had been shot like he was 100 years before he was shot, if he's shot in 1881 instead of 1981, probably he doesn't survive. But because medicine had advanced, he did live. All plays a factor in all of this. But Teddy Roosevelt, I didn't write down the year, but he was running again. This must have been around, 1911, 1912, somewhere in there. And he was shot by a guy who obviously was disconnected from reality. He said that the ghost of assassinated President William McKinley had directed him to kill Roosevelt. Now, very well may believe, because a lot of people were ticked off at Teddy Roosevelt. He's a Republican, but he's running on a third party. And they're afraid he's going to take votes from the other Republican nominee. Of course, very common what people talk about these days, and maybe most recently, maybe back in the 1990s, with Ross Perot. Remember when he ran in 92, and to a lesser extent in 96. So from there, though, the next president, although there might have been some attempts, I even think that there might have been an attempt on the vice president at one time, but really I didn't list this here. But we have to go away from the 1910s the whole way up to 1963, of course, November 22nd of 1963, to talk about the next president who was shot and then unfortunately killed. And of course, that was John F. Kennedy. Now, in the meantime, we did have a president who died in office. That would be the other Roosevelt. But he died in office because he was very sickly, and of course he had polio. He was actually in a wheelchair for most of his Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was mostly in a wheelchair for much of his presidency, but they kind of hid that from the public. And he died in 1944 while World War II was still going on. His vice president, Harry Truman, takes over. And in fact, I think maybe it was Truman that did somebody try to break in? I forget it. It's kind of bebopping around now that some killers tried to break into the vice president's residence at one time. Was it? And I forget who the vice president was at the time, but they were not successful in trying to do that. And what's also should be noted about those, the ones I've already talked about, of course, is very close proximity out in public. It's kind of the days before the Secret Service. Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley all shot at very close range in public where there were other people standing around. And that's how these killers were able to get close. Same, I guess, kind of the same thing with Teddy Roosevelt. Whereas when we move up to JFK, and if you're going to be upset about this, I can't help you. I'm just going to, I particularly believe that Lee Harvey Oswald did this all alone. You want to think something else, that's fine, but keep it out of the comments section. But of course, with JFK, we kind of move into what we might call the modern era of assassinations. And it's mainly, I think, because of weapons. By the time the 1960s rolled around, you could shoot people from a much longer distance than you ever could have, in at least reliably, going back to like the Civil War. Yes, there were rifles, but good luck hunting anything. The metallurgy had not been perfected. Of course, bullets had not been perfected. A lot of the rifles didn't even have rifling in them. So when you shot a bullet like a ball, it was like throwing if you've ever watched baseball, it's like throwing a knuckleball. You let it go and it just could go anywhere. That's kind of like what rifle shooting was during the Civil War. And it wasn't until the late 1800s into the 1900s, then you roll around to World War I, that rifling and bullet perfection and all those things, metallurgy, it all starts coming together where humans can carry weapons that can kill other humans at long distances. And so we get into this modern era with Lee Harvey Oswald. He's in the book Depository, and he uses that, what is a Carcano rifle. And Kennedy's there on an appearance in Dallas. He's in the limousine. The top is off of it. He's with his wife. He's with, what was the governor of Texas at the time, I think. And they're driving away, and Lee Harvey Oswald has set himself up in a position where instead of course, something moving left to right or right to left is very hard to hit if you're trying to hit it. But when something is moving away from you, almost in a straight line, it's almost like that target is still. It's almost like shooting something at a range. And so, in my opinion, this is why Lee Harvey Oswald was able to pull this off by himself. And of course, he missed with one shot, but he did hit with two shots. Of course, one shot went through Kennedy's neck, John Kennedy's neck, and then we have the other one that went through his head. And really, that was the shot that killed him. And the one bullet bounced around, and I know a lot has been made about it. Of course, Cyril Wecht just died recently, and he said that wasn't possible. It's absolutely possible. And in fact, that you can find YouTube videos where people have recreated this shooting, and it's not hard to do. It's really not. So the question is, was Lee Harvey Oswald's motivations political? Hard to say. I know a lot of people, once again, if you're into the conspiracy angle from this, you'll think, well, he wanted to shoot Kennedy because of what Kennedy and did with the CIA in Cuba. Or if you're into the idea that the CIA got together with the mob, they did it also because of Cuba. Some other people believe that he was assassinated because John F. Kennedy, although he got us into Vietnam, that he was on the verge of getting us out of Vietnam, and there's certain people that didn't want that to happen. So that's why he was killed. Now the big question is, did the trajectory of the United States change after John F. Kennedy got killed and Lyndon Johnson became president? I would say yes, a little bit. If John F. Kennedy remains president, I'm certainly open to the idea that we don't get into Vietnam as much as we did, even though certainly John F. Kennedy wanted us there. We have all the tapes these days that can be listened to, him talking with his brother and all his advisors. He wanted them to be there. And they supported when the Vietnamese killed their leader and put another leader in place. A lot of stuff is, a lot of people think that a lot of people, tend to forget these things. A lot of mistakes were made during those 3 years that John F. Kennedy was president. We got Cuba. We got getting deeper into Vietnam, and there were other things, certainly. I think they remember him because he's a young guy. Of course, now everything's come out. How he was cheating on his wife, and all that stuff has also come out. So maybe history hasn't been too kind to John F. Kennedy, but I still think many people, of course, because many people were alive and remember when he was president, have a very romantic idea about he and Jackie being in the office. But those years, as far as the United States doing stuff and being successful, were not very good years. But I would say if John F. Kennedy had continued to be president, hadn't been shot, does the Civil Rights Act of 1964 happen? Hard to say. I'm sure his supporters would say, oh, yeah, he would absolutely got to that. I don't know if we can maybe say that might or not have been true, but it's hard to say. So I would say that, maybe the trajectory of the United States changed a little bit. Certainly Lyndon Baines Johnson was a much different person than John F. Kennedy was, even though they were both Democrats. But I think the trajectory was changed at least a little bit. And of course, Lyndon Baines Johnson ended up being, even though the Civil Rights Act and some other things were quite good, he will always be remembered for Vietnam. And then, of course, he didn't even run for re-election in 1968. Didn't end up being that great of a president overall. I think historians have not been very kind to him, Lyndon Baines Johnson. So we get back to Lee Harvey Oswald. Was this political? Did he kill John F. Kennedy due to politics? I have to admit, I know a lot of people think differently. It's hard to say. I know a lot of people believe maybe the Soviet Union did it. Lee Harvey Oswald, did he do it for the Soviets and whatever else? All I believe is that he did it by himself, was kind of sloppy about it, and he got caught. And then we know that Jack Ruby ended up shooting him before Lee Harvey Oswald could even go to trial. Lee Harvey Oswald would scream to the reporters, I'm just a patsy and everything else. Well, a lot of killers have said that over the years, and it hasn't proven to be true. So I can't help but think the same thing with Lee Harvey Oswald. So even though I think the political trajectory of the United States changed a little bit due to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, I'm not for sure you can say this was actually what we would call a political killing, when comparing it to going back to Abraham Lincoln, which was certainly a political killing. If we're going to compare it to that, then Lee Harvey Oswald killing Kennedy is nowhere close to John Wilkes Booth killing Lincoln, in my opinion. Let's see what everybody is saying here. William H. Harrison, my grandfather, a couple of greats in there, but facts, horrible. This is very interesting. Thank you, Karen. John Main, hi, everyone. I'm a nobody expecting harm lately. Been offered lists. I don't know what that means, John. Ferry, why were there so many cops in the area after everything was over? What, I don't know what you're talking. What did Abe Lincoln and Trump have in common? The answer, they love America. I'm not getting, John, we're just staying away from that. Just, we're not doing that tonight. All right. We're not doing that. Okay. I got no time. Cranky JFK was considering MLK to be his running mate. John, I'm telling you right now, if you can do that, Sheree, if anybody's going to get in here and start talking about voting for Trump or whoever else, if you can delete it, just delete it. We're not doing that tonight. We don't do that here ever. So I got no time. JFK was considering MLK to be his running mate. I've heard that, Cranky. I can't really believe that was going to happen. I think this is one of those things that very well, I got nothing against John F. Kennedy, but is this once again revisionist history because people feel so enamored of JFK? I think it's a nice thing to say. I think it's a nice thing to think. But was JFK really going to push aside Lyndon Baines Johnson from Martin Luther King? That would be hard to really understand. Speaking of which, though, let's get out of the political realm and let's now go to Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, non-politician, but certainly played a huge role in politics in the United States, racial relations of the 1950s into the 1960s, and probably when it comes to speeches in American history, he probably made some of the best ones. I Have a Dream, etc. And Martin Luther King, I think, is one of those political figure or non-political figures, political, non-political figures that that everybody can agree on that he was a great person. You can be, for example, you can be pro-life and pro-choice. You can be opposed on that, but when it comes to Martin Luther King, most on both sides of that issue are still going to think that Martin Luther King, was very transformative figure in American history. Absolutely, and I certainly believe that. And I realize there are conspiracies here, and I'm once again going to reject all of those. He was murdered by a guy, Lee Harvey Oswald. And once again, this is a rifle killing. This is not something where Lee Harvey Oswald got up in Martin Luther King's face like like Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, shot him from a distance away and took off. And you have to, maybe people forget this. Lee Harvey Oswald was actually, when he did this, he was actually had broken out of prison at the time. And he was staying at a hotel across the street from where Martin Luther King was. And it very well may be on purpose. And I can certainly believe that Lee Harvey Oswald meant to kill Martin Luther King. I can certainly believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was a racist, and that's why he wanted to kill Martin Luther King. But I'm not sure that Lee Harvey Oswald did it just because Martin Luther King is black. And I've, once again, in trying to talk about this all intelligently tonight, started looking at this and came to the conclusion that, the very popular thinking out there, being that he was on the run and that he had no money or anything, seemingly no money, he thought that if he killed Martin Luther King and could be credited with it, that there would be racists like members of the Ku Klux Klan or whoever who might give him money to, to get away, to stay on the run for as long as possible. That didn't work out. So he killed Martin Luther King thinking that these racists, other racists who had money, would pay him for doing that. And that is not what happened. Of course, they ended up finding the rifle with the his fingerprints were all over it. And it was pretty sloppy way he went about doing this. And then he did take credit for doing it. And then he changed his mind and said he didn't do it. And he came up with this very elaborate story, kind of like what we hear on these disappearances. Like the man said, this is kind of what Lee Harvey Oswald pulled. And if you don't know this, maybe people don't know this, he was actually caught in England at Heathrow Airport. He was not caught here in the United States. He was caught by the British, and we really thank you for that. And he was extradited back to the United States from Heathrow, and that's when he started creating all these stories. And then he ended up dying in prison, going to his death, saying he wanted to change his plea to not guilty. He didn't do it, and somebody else did it. But there's enough information to show, I think. James Earl Ray. What was I saying? James Earl Ray. James Earl. I keep saying Lee Harvey Oswald. Oh my goodness, messed that up. James Earl Ray. Thank you, Sharia. I messed that up. James Earl Ray, of course, shot Martin Luther King. So just what I've said over like the last 5 minutes, it's not Lee Harvey Oswald. It's James Earl Ray. I got to put it in my notes wrong. But certainly racial. You could call it political, but it's clear to me that James Earl Ray shot Martin Luther King because he thought he was going to get a bunch of money to do so. And that if he thought he wasn't going to get paid to do this, that he wouldn't have done it. So not political, even though Martin Luther King, political failure because of getting civil rights and everything, not a politician, but certainly involved in politics. But once again, I don't think that we can call this political in the normal way that, that we, understand the saying. And so let me fix something here for a second. I'm noticing that the battery on my laptop is going down, and I'm going to try to extend it as long as I can. All right, so we have Martin Luther King, who got shot in 1968. Well, very sadly, another prominent figure in American culture was also shot that year. And that, of course, was John F. Kennedy's younger brother, Robert F. Kennedy. Of course, the father of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has been trying to run for president himself over the last couple of years. Now, let me just see what's everybody's saying. Cranky was a congresswoman, forgot her name. Was probably 15 years ago, regarding he was going to make MLKs. I just got to tell you, I just find that very, very hard to believe. Thank you, Glenn. Yes. Didn't Oswald get his marksmanship training yet? That's from that movie. That's right, Cranky. Yes. James Earl Ray. Sorry, I once again messed that up for all of you out there. I'm allowed to make a mistake once in a while. Glenn, and you go to the street location where Ray fired from. I've never been there, but I understand that isn't. In fact, don't they have that hotel where Martin Luther King was shot? Don't they have that preserved? Isn't there like a wreath out there and they have some of the same cars parked out? It looks like it did back at the time that it happened, right? Yeah, enormous training. Thank Glenn thought so. All right. So we now move up to Robert F. Kennedy. And this is a situation where it's kind of going back to the kind of assassinations that we had in the 1800s, where Sirhan shot Robert F. Kennedy up close and personal in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles in 1968. And RFK was there. He's running for president. A lot of people were believing he was going to get the Democratic nomination for president. He wouldn't end up running against Richard Nixon. Of course, a lot of people thought that he could win, despite Lyndon Baines Johnson kind of making a mess of it as a Democrat president up until 1968. Of course, 1968 is also the year that the convention was in Chicago and all the craziness that went on there. But a lot of people were thinking that Robert F. Kennedy couldn't win the presidency. Instead, he was assassinated by Sirhan. Sirhan, yes, first name, last name's the same. And what Sirhan later said is, I'll just read it to you. This just comes from Wikipedia. I can explain it. I did it for my country. By the way, Sirhan's still alive. Sirhan believed he was deliberately portrayed by RFK's support for Israel in the June 1967 Six-Day War, which began exactly 1 year before the date of the assassination. During a search of Sirhan's apartment, his arrest, a spiral-bound notebook was found containing a diary entry that demonstrated that his anger had gradually fixated on Kennedy, who had promised to send 50 fighter jets to Israel if elected president. So we have all this stuff. So all of you thinking about what's going over in the Middle East recently between Hamas and Israel and the attack, the October 7th, and everything that's going on, none of this is new. This is going on well before I was ever born in 1970. None of this is new. Sirhan said that he wanted to kill Robert F. Kennedy because Robert F. Kennedy was going to back sending these fighter jets to Israel, and that was his motivation to go down there. Now, later, and like I said, he's still alive. He also talked about, he was a communist, and I firmly support the communist cause. Its people, American capitalism will fall and give way to the workers' dictatorship. Now, later, though, in retrospect, he said, you know what? Yeah, I didn't like it. I didn't like what the United States was doing over there in the Middle East supporting Israel, but really, I was drunk. So was this political? Yes. Did it change the trajectory of the United States? No, it did not. And in fact, as you all know, no matter who is president, although there might be a lot of stuff in political media about this topic, pretty much no matter who has been president since, going back to when Israel became a country in 1948, the United States has always supported Israel. I'm not here to get into the positives or negatives of that. All right. Support whatever. But no matter who has been in president, no matter what political party and, whatever you think about each political party and everything, the United States has pretty much always supported Israel. So Sirhan doing this, certainly political, even if he was drunk or not. But no matter who was going to be president, was always going to support Israel, whether we're sending 50 fighter jets to help them out or whatever else. And of course, we continue to help them to this day. Once again, I'm not here to get into whether that's right or wrong. My point is that he thought in doing this that it might change things. It didn't. It didn't. Nixon became president. Of course, there was another war when Nixon in the Middle East, in which Israel won again. What was it? The Yom Kippur War, or maybe that's Six-Day War, Yom Kippur War, and then finally there was a Middle East peace process. Of course, the Camp David Accords signed in the late 70s with Jimmy Carter brokering a deal between Egypt and Israel with Anwar Sadat. And Anwar Sadat, leader of, speaking of assassinations, he was assassinated because of making this peace deal with Israel. If you don't know, that's a fascinating story. Fascinating story if you really want to get into that. So, but political, it didn't change the trajectory. And of course, Richard Nixon became president in 1968 and continued to support Israel, whereas Sirhan got caught immediately and was put in jail. Now, the interesting part about that is that RFK Jr. will tell everybody he doesn't believe that Sirhan shot Robert, his father. So you can take that into consideration. I'm not sure. I think the same. Glenn says, yes, the hotel is the museum. Thank you for that. I'd love to go check that out sometime, Glenn. Thank you. National Civil Rights Museum. Yeah, very interesting. And Boston Actress, thank you for your donation through Super Chat tonight. Thank you. You are very generous. Sharif, fun fact, trivia question, 9th grade history answer. Sirhan got me out of a final exam. Look at you, Sharif. Look at you. Yeah, Yom Kippur. That was the other war that started. And there was the 6-Day War in 67. And then there was the Yom Kippur War, which Jordan and Lebanon and Egypt did much better in that war, but Israel eventually repulsed them that time too. All right, so we have Sirhan. So certainly political, really didn't change anything. We now come up to Gerald Ford, and of all these, of course, none of these are funny. These are all horrible. But this one is kind of at least darkly humorous because you think about all modern presidents. Let's just say all presidents since World War II. Of all of them, the one you would think least likely for anybody to care about what the guy did was Gerald Ford. Remember, the only reason he became president is because, of course, Richard Nixon got reelected in 1972. We all know about Watergate. His vice president, Spiro Agnew, got in trouble for tax evasion or something. He dropped out of being, he couldn't be vice president anymore. And Nixon appointed Gerald Ford to be his vice president. Then, of course, Richard Nixon in August of 1974 resigns because of Watergate. Gerald Ford becomes president, even though nobody had ever voted for him. It's a very interesting trivia question. And Gerald Ford, you think about milquetoast politician. I think a lot of people, if you know anything, Gerald Ford is like that guy. He was a decent guy, I think, and everything. But still, while he was running, not to be reelected, but to be elected president for the first time in 1976, of course, he was running against Jimmy Carter. At a campaign stop in Sacramento, California in 1976. Yeah, Garrett says Gerald Ford was one of the most boring white guys ever. True. I agree with that. And Chevy Chase loved making fun of Gerald Ford on Saturday Night Live. You can see those skits on YouTube. But what happened was Gerald Ford was at a campaign event in Sacramento, California, and one of Charles Manson's followers, Squeaky Fromme, tried to kill Gerald Ford. She was waiting in line. He was going down the line, kissing babies, shaking hands. She tries to shoot Gerald Ford, but what she didn't realize is that I guess it must have been a semi-automatic gun. There was no bullet in the chamber. And so the gun didn't go off. She gets tackled. Of course, she gets taken to prison. And she was there for a long time. She might be out now, maybe. But she went to prison for a long time for trying to kill Gerald Ford. Now you say, well, why did she do that? Was it crazy or something? Well, not really. But I don't know if it was necessarily political either. She wanted to shoot Gerald Ford, of all reasons, because of the pollution that was allegedly damaging California. It's a true story. It wasn't because of Charles Manson being in jail or anything else. She was worried about the redwood trees in California, and she bought into the idea that pollution was going to kill all of the trees. And she thought a good idea to get attention for this cause was to shoot Gerald Ford. So, political topic. Pollution is a political topic. Yes. Saving the environment. Yes. Political topic. But was the shooting political? I'm not so sure. I don't think that as far as pollution in California and the redwood trees, as far as Gerald Ford's agenda as president, I bet it wasn't even in the top 100. Unlike going back to the very political shooting of Abraham Lincoln, where John Wilkes Booth, number one reason to do that was to keep the Union and the South separated still, even though the war was over. So you put it in that context, and Squeaky Fromme, although in her mind, allegedly, of course she's a little crazy, political topic. But was the shooting political? I think that's a stretch. I think it's a stretch. And we might even question, was she really, really, really trying to kill Gerald Ford? I think we might even question that. But of course, he survived because the gun never went off. He lost the election to Jimmy Carter in 1976. Jimmy Carter, of course, served for 4 years. And then the problems he had, of course, was mainly with the economy, along with the Iran hostage situation. And that takes us up to the assassination, or the attempted assassination, of Ronald Reagan in 1981. Of course, this is the first one that I remember within my lifetime, even though I was alive for Gerald Ford's 6 years old, who knows. But by the time Reagan is shot, I'm 10. And I can remember to this day, us sitting, was I in 5th grade? Must have been 5th grade, bringing in the 4th or 5th grade, bringing in the TV, nonstop coverage about all of this. And I can still remember being in a classroom and watching the news on all this. That's all we'd do all day. And so we come up to the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. Let's see what's everybody saying. She was paroled in 2009, lives in upstate New York. Thank you for checking for that, Glenn. So she is out of prison. Yeah, thank you for checking that, Glenn. So we now move up to Ronald Reagan. And we have to remember that Ronald Reagan only been president for a few months when this happened. Of course, he became president in January of 1981, and so it was 2 to 3 months into his presidency. He made a speech at a hotel. He was already elected president. Wasn't in the campaign stops. Gave the speech, and of course, you can see the video to this day on YouTube, many places. He walks out. Secret Service is around him, and out of nowhere, John Hinckley comes out of nowhere, fires some shots. The press secretary gets hit, and he remained paralyzed for the rest of his life. His last name was Brady. And if you've ever wondered where the gun control group with the name Brady, that's where it comes from, if you've ever wondered that. He was Reagan's press secretary. But what happened was that Reagan got hit. And it's a very unique way in which he got hit. The bullet actually bounced off of the limousine that he was going to. And the bullet bounced, of course, hit him. And like I already said before, had it been 1881 instead of 1981, I'm sure Ronald Reagan dies. But they whisked him off to the nearest hospital. He managed to get out of the limo and walk into the hospital. But if you've ever seen any interviews that he ever did about this, as soon as he got into the hospital, he collapsed. He was bleeding internally and everything else. And of course, this was done by James Brady. Thank you, Garrett. Remember how many times on the news they replayed that footage over and over again? I don't remember that necessarily, but I remember watching it a lot back then. And I've watched many documentaries on it since. Yeah, it was the press secretary, James Brady. Thank you. James Brady, the Brady Group. If you ever see them in the news, they are a 501c3 that is all about gun control in the United States. Once again, not making any comment on that. But that's where it comes from, if you've ever wondered. So John Hinckley. Why did he shoot Ronald Reagan? Well, I think a lot of people know this is probably, at least with the American assassinations go, probably one of the most unusual reasons of all of them. He did it to impress Jodie Foster. Yes, the actress. John Hinckley became infatuated with Jodie Foster. In fact, he would call her. She was at Yale. He would call her and talk to her. And there are recordings out there of him talking to her. You can hear Jodie Foster as a teenager. And you have to remember, she had gotten a lot of attention because she was in Taxi Driver and some other movies. And so he became infatuated with her. And of course, she wouldn't have nothing to do with him. I would say that I have nothing against Jodie Foster in any of this. I think Jodie Foster handled this the best as she could. I think Jodie Foster is a fantastic person. She handled it. You can hear in these recordings, she was very nice to him. She didn't, say F off or anything. But he thought the best way to impress her was to go out and to kill Ronald Reagan. And so he got a gun, was waiting out there. And like I said, this kind of goes back to the 1800s types of assassinations where the assassin got right up close and personal and just by luck, I guess, hit Ronald Reagan. And of course, Reagan survived. He served out his 2 terms. And for all I can tell regarding Ronald Reagan, I think he felt very sorry once he found out John Hinckley's situation, his mental state, and everything. My impression is Ronald Reagan felt very sorry for this guy. He wasn't in his right mind. And you should know John Hinckley is now out of jail. He's still alive, out of jail, even though he shot an American president. Now we know this has been back in the 1800s. He probably wouldn't have lasted a couple weeks, but once again, this is how the United States has changed. But was this political? Certainly not. Certainly not. Even though Ronald Reagan was the new president, I would think a lot of people thought that, Reagan, much different kind of president than Jimmy Carter was, and a little more polarizing, let's say, even though he won the first election very easily, won the next even more easily. But he was taking a different attitude toward the economy and the Soviet Union, much more confrontational and things. And you'd think that might bring some people, think, well, what's this guy doing? And there certainly were a lot of people, but that's not the reason that John Hinckley shot Ronald Reagan. It was all over a girl. So what do we see in looking at all of these shootings and trying to compare this to Donald Trump? Once again, I don't care if you support him, hate him. I'm not getting into that. I think what we're saying here, looking at all of these political assassinations, I'm going to get into a non-political one here, but most of them are not what we would say political. Most of them are pulled off by, delusional people who have anger issues, are angry at something, but not necessarily the person they're trying to shoot. Yes, John Wilkes Booth hated Abraham Lincoln, but when we look at James Garfield, William McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt got shot because the guy thought, it was a ghost. The assassin said the ghost was telling him to shoot Teddy Roosevelt. Lee Harvey Oswald certainly could be political, but it's hard to say. Lee Harvey Oswald has always struck me as kind of a loser. Maybe he was just jealous of John F. Kennedy. Martin Luther King, certainly, I think there was a hatred because James Earl Ray was a racist, but I also think this was just done for money that he didn't end up getting. RFK, certainly political, but I also can think if Sirhan's not drunk, maybe he doesn't do it. Gerald Ford, not political. Ronald Reagan, not political. So I think you need to keep this all in mind as you continue to watch the news regarding the shooting that happened just a quarter mile away from where I'm sitting, and really gauge this for yourself, because I think this is one of those things where no matter what media you're watching, just local news or the nightly news or CNN or Fox News or anything else, I think my impression, because I have being that I'm a member in the media, I'm a reporter, I have a horrible opinion of all of that. They're going to automatically portray all of this as some sort of, political, and they're going to portray all these assassinations as political. I think I just demonstrated over like the last hour and 20 minutes. For the most part, they aren't. And for the most part, none of these shootings change politics in the United States at all. Whereas surely, if I were to look at assassinations in other countries, especially maybe where there was dictatorships or something like that, certainly the directions of those countries changed. And I think what this shows, that we have to remember, I realize some of these people, Martin Luther King, not in office, Teddy Roosevelt, when he was shot in office, Donald Trump, not in office, his job is not politician right now. It may be in a few months, maybe not. But even with the ones who were shot that aren't politicians, who aren't in political office but are kind of politicians, it's not really political. It's usually, for the most part, done by people who already have stuff going on in their heads, in their lives. Things aren't going right. They got some hatred going on for something, and they're looking to take it out on somebody. I think you need to keep that all in mind. So I want to look, though, at one more assassination. Yeah, let's see. Incident nonprofit. Glenn Hinckley was never jailed due to the insanity. Was released the last couple years. Restrictions about how far he could travel. Right. I guess jail in generic terms. Glenn, thank you. Garrett, this was also a few months after John Lennon had been assassinated. I'm going to talk about that one right now. So let's get to somebody who was way, 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 way out of politics. Maybe could be seen as a political figure because of how famous he was and some of the songs that he wrote. But he was not a politician, was not aspiring to any political office, wasn't doing any campaigning or anything else. Was not responsible for any civil rights legislation like Martin Luther King was or anything like that. And that's, of course, John Lennon. Remember, when we talk about assassination, the word, that means the murder or attempted murder of some prominent person, some famous person. It doesn't have to be a politician or somebody who's recognized in politics. It's just considered to be a concentrated murder plan that involves somebody famous. That brings us to John Lennon. He was, of course, shot by Mark David Chapman. Now, why did he do this? I guess in a way you could say this was what we might say politically personal. What do I mean by that? Well, Mark David Chapman, for a long part of his life, worshipped John Lennon, as many people did. I've never been a big Beatles guy, so I don't know. But really, really, really looked up to John Lennon. Loved the music, loved the Beatles, loved all of this. But Mark David Chapman also became infatuated with the book A Catcher in the Rye, which is a book, in which it has a lot to do with hypocrisy and, very, kind of a very negative view toward life and all of this. And in that book, hypocrites are treated very, very, or viewed as very, 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 it's been years, and I probably read it in high school, but very poorly. Well, in reading that book, Mark David Chapman came to believe that John Lennon was a hypocrite. Here he was talking about imagine, no possessions. It's like his song Imagine, very, very well known song, and so Mark David Chapman started looking at all the lyrics that John Lennon had put in his music, and I guess Beatles music as well, and then looked at the way John Lennon was living, driving around in Rolls Royces and everything else. And this ticked Mark David Chapman off. And he stood outside where John Lennon was living in New York City. The two had actually encountered each other earlier in their day. And in fact, there's a very, very famous photo. This actually happened. Mark David Chapman was standing outside of where John Lennon was living in New York City with his book, Catcher in the Rye. Was it Catcher in the Rye? It was a book. And he got John Lennon to sign it earlier that day. And there is actually a picture of this happening. But what happened was when John Lennon came back later that day, Mark David Chapman was still there, and he shot him, killed him. So this is certainly an assassination. Was it political? I guess you could say it was, even though John Lennon was not a political person. But it did have to do, as John Lennon, if you see him as a leader, him being a hypocrite, saying one thing but doing another. And Mark David Chapman thought that this was enough for him to wait out there and kill John Lennon. Ghostsmith, you're laying us both beautifully and entertaining, learning lots of things I never heard of. Trying to do that tonight. You're very welcome for that, Ghostsmith. That's very kind of you to say. Put some work into this, so I appreciate you noticing that I did this. Thank you. Very kind. That's very nice of you to say. And it should be known, I'm helped along certainly by the fact that I've always been interested in these things. Glenn, he signed an album, but had the Catcher in the Rye with him. Thank you, Glenn. It definitely was Catcher in the Rye. So he signed an album. All right, Glenn. But there's a very famous, like I said, a very famous photo that you can find anywhere online. So you could say it was political, certainly personal, but political as well. When you start thinking about some person that you see as a leader and them saying one thing and doing another, you could call that as being political. But overall, so that was the assassination of a person not close to politics at all, but kind of the same as some of the ones that I talked about. But most of these ones, once again, these are what I consider the big assassinations in American history, even though I know John Lennon was not an American. He just was killed in America. For the most part, though, not political. So that brings us up to what happened a couple of days ago with Donald Trump. And of course, a lot has been made about the rhetoric. And of course, if you go to Twitter and a lot of these places, a lot of people wishing that Donald Trump was dead. A lot of people are saying, well, this is, you say this along enough, then somebody's going to take you up on this. And did that cause this? I will tell you that I don't think this was the cause of this shooting at all, as best as I can tell at this point. Why do I say that? I say that because, first of all, this kid who did this, obviously they're going to have to get to the bottom how he could get to do this in the first place. I'm going to stay away from that. But he had no escape plan. This kid had to know, if he was even close to his right mind, he had to know that he's going out there, he's going to be shooting Donald Trump, maybe miss, maybe hit him, hit other people. There's no escape plan. He's up on a roof. There's no way to get out of this. And that's why I said at the beginning of this that to me, this feels much more like what we see in like these school shootings, even if we want to put Columbine in there or whatever else. Just maybe a violent kid, something wrong with him mentally, wanting to take it out on someone or some people. We might think about some of these more recent school shootings. I'm thinking of the one where it was at Louisville or Nashville, where there's they have the badge cam with the police going in there and finally encountering the shooter and killing that kid. These are not what we would call necessarily targeted shootings or shootings for purpose. This is more like suicide by cop. When you start thinking about this, of course, we know what suicide by cop is. But when I started thinking about a shooting, there's no way to get out or anything, I started thinking suicide by cop. Did this kid want to die? And he knew a sure way to do that would be to show up at a political rally where Donald Trump is and all these people are going to be, start shooting, and he know that he would be shot. I'm not guaranteeing that's going to be the answer, but this is what comes to my mind. What also goes into my thinking is afterwards, they found his vehicle and they found a bunch of explosives and things inside. Well, you tell me how he was going to ever use any of them if he stuck up on that roof. Once again, this starts to sound to me like the kinds of shootings we've heard before, where a shooter goes somewhere, kills people, gets shot himself, and then they find, like I said, explosive devices or fake explosive devices in a car or in a shed or at the person's house. Well, what exactly was the plan then? How did this person really think, well, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to shoot all these people and I'm going to get away with it. And then I'm going to go home and I'm going to continue to work on my bomb plan. It's hard to understand. And so when I think about this, I'm going to tell you, also using history as a gauge, that I do not believe that this guy who attempted, surely Donald Trump was the target. I do not believe this was a political shooting. I do not believe that this kid was doing this hoping to change the direction of the United States. I don't believe this kid was doing this to change, whoever is going to get elected in November. I think they're just going to find that this is some kid, mental issues and things, and they fixated on something. And that there are a lot of famous people not listed tonight. Of course, there have been many, many, many famous people murdered by people they didn't know. Stalkers, a lot of Hollywood actresses murdered. Of course, that actress, stalked and killed, and infatuations and fixations and all of these things. To me, this sounds more like that than like John Wilkes Booth, for example, or what else can we compare? Sirhan, which, like I said, is political, but also he might have been drunk at the time. It's just hard to tell. Just have to remember, most of these shootings are not what we would call political. They're not trying to change an election. They're not trying to change the trajectory of the United States, everything. And this should be a lesson to all of us, is that the United States is bigger than one politician, one political office, one political ideology, one political party, and everything else. There's a reason that when it comes to the power of the United States, the government power at the federal level, there's a reason it's so dispersed. We have 3 functions of government, and they are all considered to be equal. And this is why I think, even going back to Abraham linking up, up to JFK and all these presidents who died, this is why, for the most part, even though what we consider to be the leader of the country was assassinated, that the country didn't change too much. And I recognize Donald Trump's not president. Now, I really don't care if he gets elected in November or not. Stay out of that stuff. But this is the strength of the United States. Now, here's something else. Marty says he had to know he wasn't making it out. Yeah, from what I heard, he bullied on a daily basis, a real loner, rather than something intended to use that day. I mean, yeah, if he thought he could get away, but it's just, how did he think he was going to get away? I don't know. Hazel, I think he was a troubled loner, I'm sure, just like Trump, but at the same time, he goes out famous. Yep. Yeah, and that's a function of our media today, Hazel. That's a function of our media today. And there is a thinking out there, should we be naming these people and everything? Does this not then cause more people who are like that to get their 15 minutes of fame, like Andy Warhol talked about? Now, I will say one more thing, and all of you, I don't care about your political leanings or anything else, or whether you're going to vote in November. I don't care. But although you may not follow politics too much, you may be thinking, is this a sign that something, the United States is going downhill? That this is a sign that, man, we've just lost it? The answer is absolutely not. And I would say this, I don't care if they're shooting at Trump, they're shooting at Joe Biden. I don't want anybody to be shot. Nobody. Nothing. Nobody. Even though I'm a gun owner and all that, I don't want anybody to be shot. Even though I have my own political ideas, I don't want anybody to be shot. But I don't want all of you to get down because of this. Whether you love Trump or hate Trump or whatever else, if you're a good person, you know that this has no position in politics or anything ever. And so if that's thinking, man, it's just not the United States that I, grew up in. Well, if you grew up in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan got assassinated. Or didn't get assassinated, but got shot. If it's the 1970s, somebody tried to kill Gerald Ford in 1976. If you grew up in the 1960s, of course, it was JFK, it was RFK, it was Martin Luther King. And I want to remind you, when we start looking back at history of the United States, not talking about other countries, but the United States, you start thinking about the Civil War. You start thinking about the Revolutionary War. You start thinking about the Great Depression and everything else. And before you start feeling sorry for all of us in 2024 of what's going on, any of those people in any of those years, those decades, pick a year, any of them would pick now over when they lived. Remember that. Remember that. You know, you think back, well, things were so simpler at some, they weren't. That's just you know, people's ego talking. Any of those people, you know, 1930s with the Depression, if they found out how we were living in the United States today, they would easily time travel to this time and say, I'm living here. Holy heck, this is fantastic compared to the 1930s. Or even the 1960s, we had the Vietnam War. We have, of course, presidents, you know, leaders getting assassinated. Anybody in the 1960s would pick now over then if they're smart. Now, I realize people, you know, well, the 1960s, man, I was a teenager back then. It was so cool and everything else. It wasn't as great as you think. That's just your youth talking. You know, even me, I grew up in the 1980s. I had a fantastic time during the 1980s. I loved 1980s music. But objectively, I'd rather be here, right now, like that song was from the early 1990s when I was in college. I'd rather be right here, right now in 2024 than I would pick any day in the 1980s when you look at the overall picture. When we start thinking about the Soviet Union still existed, we had crime was way up. We have a crack epidemic and everything else. I'll take now over any time. So don't feel too sorry for us who are all alive here in 2024. Compared to all of American history, we have it pretty good. Don't let the media get you down. Okay? Because that's what they will do. That's what they will do. They'll scare you. They'll tell you this. How can this happen in the United States? This kind of stuff has been happening since the beginning. We had one of our founding fathers murdered, killed in a duel, Alexander Hamilton. Yet somehow this country's still here all these years later. We had in 1812, they burned Washington, D.C. We're still here. Don't let the media scare you because of all this. Certainly there are things that have to be figured out how this could happen. But from a cultural point of view, don't let this all scare you. Don't let them do that. Please, please, please. Yeah, very nuanced, Ed. Kirmoth, I care. I think you should all vote. Vote your choice, but vote Cherie. Okay. Glenn, the problem now is with 24-hour media has things to say to fill the time. Yep. As soon as we go back to nightly news just being a half hour long and local news being like 2 hours long, and we get rid of the 24/7 news cycle, get rid of all those channels, we will be a better off. I continue to believe that. Yeah, it was Reagan in the 80s, right? Sure. I don't think Americans are many more crazy than I already thought. That's funny. I stayed away from Reddit though. Hugh, lots. Yeah, crazies. Anybody can say anything over there. Yeah. Gus Smith says, Smith 28 says, romanticize the past. It's so easy to do. Right. You know, everybody thinks, well, you know, the 1950s, you know, like my dad, of course, of a certain age, the 1950s were so great. Yeah, they were great unless you were a minority. Yeah, they were fantastic. Unless you were black and had to sit at a different table and drink from a different fountain and ride at the back of the back and everything else. Yeah, it was great except for that. Yeah, if you were a white guy, yeah, it's great. But if you were a minority, you know, this all has to be taken into account when we start thinking about how great the past was. You have to count everything, not just the things that you like. Of course, the Vietnam War in the 60s, 58,000 Americans killed. And we want to go back to the 1960s. Really? It's crazy. We didn't start the fire. Yeah, that's Billy Joel. I was thinking of the song Right Here, Right Now. There is no other place I'd rather be. What is that? Jesus Jones? I think that was Jesus Jones that did that song. Yeah. All right. Um for sports, enough time to finish sports. I need to answer. So that's just remember the best time is now. Never forget that. I got to answer Glenn's question. Thank you for hanging in there, Glenn. Along the lines of genetic genealogy, is there anything in the works or on the horizon that may be a game changer in solving missing persons cases? Glenn, I have to admit, of course, science regarding all this stuff is not my strong suit. We rarely talk about genetics or forensics or anything like that. I can only guess that science is going to continue to evolve regarding, testing of DNA. And there's certainly DNA that's been collected that has been damaged in some way, and current technology can't figure it out. If you're asking me, do you think eventually they'll be able to figure that out? Probably. I can't make a guarantee on that or anything, but it seems to me that we continue to make progress on this. But specifically, do I know anything about anything in the works? No, I don't, because really, once again, it's not my area of expertise. Having said that, I do predict, of course, I've said this on this live show before, I think that there's going to be a time where there's going to be some civil rights questions about collecting of DNA and everything like that. I'm predicting that. In fact, I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. But I wonder if we're going to get to the point where there's going to be some case where they're going to question the legality of collecting DNA off of something that's something that someone has discarded. Of course, a lot of DNAs, they're following somebody they think's a killer. Person drinks something, throws the cup in the trash. Person walks away. Detective gets that, brings it in. Oh yeah, it's the killer. I'm thinking those situations at some point, that's going to come under judicial scrutiny, because it could be said, of course, here in the United States, we can't self-incriminate ourselves. And is testing of DNA self-incrimination? I think it's an interesting question. And I know that would throw our entire judicial system and everything into, a little bit of a mess, but people's civil rights are more important than convicting people. Better a guilty person go free than an innocent person go to jail. That's the view we have in the United States. That's the best I can do on that, Glenn. Yes, Jesus Jones. It's not you two. No, it's Jesus Jones. Ed, you are wise. Appreciate. Thank you, Lisa. I am wise, Lisa. Thank you. Of course, we got 6 more minutes. Going back to the assassination topic again, I did make this video. It's up here on the YouTube channel, where with my dad, I guess at the end of it, we're talking about like how I'd never buy a Nissan. I stick by that statement, by the way. But I made this video of me going around the perimeter where this all happened. Just gave you some of my insight coming to this area like several times over the past 20 years. So check that out. Please like that video, like this video, give this a thumbs up. I hope you haven't forgot to do that tonight. Also, we want to remind you, although I have to check in with the production company coming up in August, that of course, that show that I worked on in Greeley, Colorado back in December, that I think is supposed to be coming out next month. So be looking for that. I'm going to try to figure out if that's happening or not for you. And probably the other big news is that this database that I have been talking about, that I want to get put together, so we can really get inside the numbers, and the equations and the relationships, causation, and correlation of disappearances and everything. That is getting started, and she knows who she is, But thank you, Cherie. I'm going to remember that I'm going to remember you say that next time we disagree upon something, even if it's on a song, Cherie. This database is getting started by a listener. And it's going to take her a long time to do this, but she's more than up to the task. But Unfound is going to have its own database of its own disappearances that we've featured, but it's going to be very, very, very detailed. Way more than NamUs or the Charlie Project goes. And I'm going to make this, I think eventually I will make this database public. And you will actually like to be able to go like the NamUs, pick parameters and everything. You will be able to do that for all of Unfound's disappearances. And you'll be able to click off on all sorts of different, were they in a relationship? Did they have a drug issue? On them, you'll be able to pick just about any particular fact about any disappearance, click on any of these parameters, and we'll start to see, are there disappearances that are similar to each other, but we as humans, our brains aren't sophisticated enough to see the connection. So that has gotten started. I don't think it's going to be done anytime soon. That's totally fine. I'm not going anywhere. But it's going to be fantastic. And it will be the only one of its kind in the history of the world. We think big here. And, and even though I haven't brought it up for a while, me, I'm always thinking about the world outside the internet. How do we get, I think we've kind of mastered covering disappearances, and we certainly helped, I think, solve a few disappearances here. But how do we make that more common, and how do we bring this information that's been accumulated to the people who actually do this, the professionals who do this every day, whether it's at a local police department, state police department, the FBI. What are we learning here? We have a lot of information. We think that there is this information that can be used to solve more disappearances because we've collected this information and put it into a form that everybody can understand. That's the next step for Unfound. Very excited about it. All right, and the woman who's doing this, I cannot thank her enough. I know she's in the chat tonight. I cannot thank her enough. She's a very smart, very meticulous woman who I've gotten to know very well. And this project is in very, very good hands. I would try to do it myself. I just don't have time. But I'm going to assist her with it. She's taking she's certainly, I'm not forcing her to do it. This is right up her alley. Trust me. That's why I asked her to do it. So there you go. Be looking for this. It's going to take a while, but I'll continue to remind all of you that it's happening. So this Friday, doing something different this Friday. Last Monday, so July 8th, I interviewed a retired FBI agent, and she was also an FBI profiler. Her name is Julia Cowley, Cowley. And she, along with some other retired FBI agents, host a podcast called The Consult, Consult. I hope you will check it out. I've gotten to know her through Caroline Lowe of Jody Huisentrude disappearance fame. And I interviewed her last Monday. It was almost a 4-hour interview. We go through how she got started. We talk about some of the cases that she's worked on. We talk about how she got into podcasting. We talk about her being in the FBI when 9/11 happened. I ask her any and all questions about being in the FBI, being a profiler. Any question that I could think of, she answered it. It's a fantastic, in-depth interview. It's going to be a 2-parter. Come out on Friday. I'm just calling it Interview with the Agent. Yes, like Interview with a Vampire. Well, she interviewed me the next day. And so I will be appearing on her podcast sometime before the end of July. So you're going to get to hear the interview I did with her this Friday in 2 parts. And then some point before the end of the month, I will be appearing on The Consult when she asks me all about me getting into podcasting and disappearances and my attitudes toward disappearances. And we talk about this database And we talk about some of the disappearances, some of the noteworthy disappearances that Unfound has covered. So that's this Friday. It's not a disappearance, but you will hear she's worked on the Golden State Killer. She worked on Israel Keys. So I think you're really, really going to enjoy it. Interview with the Agent is this Friday. Curious to see the connections with alcohol and drug use, bars, and missing persons. It'll be in there, Cranky99. I can guarantee you. Hazel's getting out here. I will say hi to my dad. And I'm done. Unique show tonight. I hope you found it all informative. Very quick history of the assassinations of famous people, mostly politicians in the United States. The point was to show you most of the time assassinations are not political and really have nothing to do with any political party or politician or idea or topic or anything else. It usually has to do with a lot of other stuff. Thank you for listening. Give this video a thumbs up. Share it with your friends and family if they're interested in the history of assassinations. And you'll hear me this Friday for my interview with Julia Cowley. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Good night.